Hi, folks. Welcome to the OFM podcast, where metabolic health and performance matter. And we do a deep dive and get down to the granular, sometimes maybe too granular. But today, I've got on one of our latest medical and research advisory committee members, Dr. Amy Bukszpan.
Close, Bukszpan.
Did I butcher that?
No, it's pretty close. Bukszpan. There you go. Yeah.
Bukszpan. That's easy.
Yeah, it's very easy.
Easy. Dr. Amy Bukszpan, and she's not your typical medical doctor. She is a psychologist specializing in behavioral she's a behavioral analyst, correct?
That's correct. Yes. I have a doctorate in applied behavior analysis. I am a doctorate level behavior analyst. Correct.
Okay. And you're a big follower. I want to say this because I'm the same way. I've got a bias here. I'm a big fan of B.F. Skinner's behavioral psychology work, his body of work. I know one of the people who actually did a PhD with him. He's still alive, and it totally makes sense to me. So I'm like thrilled to have you on the podcast and part of our team, because I think our collaboration is going to really continue that innovation we're trying to push in every realm of life.
Yes, agreed. B.F. Skinner is the father of what we look at the science of human behavior, and that's what behavior analysis is, the study of human behavior. So we are the birth child of B.F. Skinner, rather than if you look at other psychologies, you might hear Freud is the father of those other types of psychology fields. But human behavior, and what I specialize in, applied behavior analysis, is from the science of what we do, how we respond, how the environment affects us, all under B.F. Skinner.
Right. And B.F. Skinner is like F.M. Alexander with the Alexander technique, and B.F. Skinner. These things all align with our natural evolutionary process, because B.F. Skinner's whole thing was you can change behavior based on the variables of environmental conditions and all these conditions. And that's one of the reasons why I really, follow a lot of what B.F. Skinner's work does, because it aligns with what I consider our naturally evolutionary heritage is, made us the apex predator and made us the robust and intelligent creatures we are. Of course, we get ahead of ourselves, and we're too smart for our own good sometimes. And that's why we need behavioral analysts to kind of reset it, because like I say, we've taken ourselves so far outside of the natural world and into the man-made construct. It has these unintended consequences of behavior, right?
Right. So it's interesting because B.F. Skinner or Skinnerian, we look at that in the way that more people might look at Darwin and Darwinian evolution in a survival of the fittest sort of way. With Skinnerian science, human behavior, we look at the evolution of behavioral responses. And you can look at how we've evolved to engage certain ways or to behave certain ways because of the environment and certain what that sets up on one side. So you said environmental variables or certain variables, and then how we respond. And on the opposite side, what are variables in relation to how we behave, how they're the consequences for our behavior, and how that might reinforce or punish what we're doing, and it maintains how we react. So it might be how we train, what we eat, all of these types of things.
Oh God, yeah, exactly. I mean, and we'll get into those connections today, and hopefully, the audience it'll pique their interest, because we want you to engage and start thinking about this and how it applies to your world and those individual variables, because all of us are in N=1, and that's what the modern science that people are exposed to through media and communications. It's like these studies, and you have to have big data sets, but the applied science to each person or athlete is an N=1. And it's taking all those things that studies show and bringing them back down to distilling them. But those variables, including behavioral variables, environment, become that N=1. And that to each of you listening, that is your science, and own it. It's not anecdotal or be dismissed. If you're honest with yourself and you're really getting good feedback, it's science for you.
Right. And the N of 1, meaning when we have research studies, they might say N of 400, N of 20. So it's how many participants were in there. So when we're talking about an N of 1, we're just talking about one person. Or in applied behavior analysis, we look at single subject design. So small groups replicated. So you might have 3 individual participants and develop an intervention, but it's very individualized. So we take that out of research and we take that out of clinical practice, and we look at what intervention might work for me or works for Peter. We have individualized, we have interventions in a science base from research, but then how it works for me and how it might work for you, we might have to address differently, because my motivating systems, what motivates me internally or intrinsically, might be different for Peter, which might motivate, he might need to look at outside motivators that are extrinsic, which are things we can talk about. But it's important to note that there is a scientific foundation for what we're talking about in the interventions. But then when we apply it, and this is what it is, we're talking in applied science here. So applied behavior analysis, it's not experiential. We're already done with that. We're now saying, hey, let's take this intervention, let's apply it to you, and then we're going to individualize it so it's most successful for the environmental variables around you, what's supporting the behavior and what's reinforcing the behaviors.
That's right. And it's on a dynamic spectrum too, because I think a lot of science has become very static. This study says this study says this. So once you intervene with those variables and individualize them for you in that point in time, all of a sudden, guess what? You get changed behavior or changed physiology. Well, now you got to kind of readjust. So it's a constant tweaking, a constant journey.
Yeah, I love that. Actually, you hit on the nose, because in my practice and the mentors I've had, we've stressed flexible decision making. Actually, one of my mentors that I had in my doctorate program works with what we call it's basically being able to respond in the moment flexibly and reflectively to the client that you're working with. It refers to as clinical judgment. And we should have that whenever we're working with scientific interventions, that we have to understand that, like, I have an intervention, but that doesn't mean these are a set of rigid protocols that I follow when I have a client. It needs to be delivered in a mechanism and a technology that is flexible enough to meet the individual needs of the client that I'm working with. And that's why what's beautiful about behavior analysis and applied sciences and human behavior is you can look introspectively, you can look at yourself and go, all right, this is the behavior I want to change. What interventions can I look at, or how do I modify this so I'm successful? And I think that you hit it really on the nose when you talk about that flexibility piece. It's super important, I think, for the technology of the science. And it's been something that I have been a huge proponent of throughout my research and my studies.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And so for the listener, this really is about you and what we're talking about, because Amy's on board and she's there to coach you if you want some behavioral stuff, but we'll talk about that at the end. But we're going to just kind of noodle on how both changing behavior makes you more open to changing physiology, and at the same time, those metabolic physiological changes that we make with OFM also support the kind of behavioral changes you want, to where you're living life to the fullest. You're in a very functional, non-didactic, non-hyper-conscious, highly structured scenario that leads to a lot of stress. Because like I say, the physiology of stress, the metabolic physiology of stress creates a huge amount of stress, and the physiology of that produces cortisol, which means you're going to burn sugar. So it's like I say, chronic stress, which means conscious thought about everything you're doing, everything you put in your mouth, how you train, what your heart rate is, what your power is. Those are all stressors. And there's big a problem as too many carbs in the diet. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, we can look at things And the science of human behavior is interesting because we can get to a point where we can set up our systems that we have a level of reinforcement. And what I mean by that is that we're choosing to engage in a certain response or behavior, be it what I eat, how much I sleep, how I engage on social media, that the consequences of those behaviors continue to go back and get reinforced. So I maintain engaging in them. And I don't have to particularly, in the end, think about why I'm doing this. It becomes part of the environmental settings and the place settings that I have for myself. So I choose to wake up every morning and I go out for my morning run and I feel great afterwards. All right, that feeling of feeling great afterwards because I woke up early, got my morning run done, is going to then be the motivator that continuously gets me up early. So I go on my morning run, I'm going to feel good again. So we have that high level of, that runner's high or dopamine release. And the same thing will happen when you're eating right and you're doing nutrition correctly. You will get into this pattern of behavior and response that becomes the reinforcer for that behavior. And you get to the point where you're not always thinking about what choice I make. You're making that choice because it's been reinforced before and it becomes part of your repertoire of behavioral responding.
Right. And that's something we need to note is that, as brilliant as our human minds are, and that's what sets us apart from other animal species, our conscious mind ability to collate and process all the choices we make each day is very limited, whereas our subconscious mind, once we get that behavior in place, is pretty much unlimited in terms of its ability to handle a lot of tasks, right?
Yeah, we believe as a behavior analyst, we don't believe that there's like a little person inside your head chugging along, kind of making decisions for you, or that there's an alternative decision maker there. We believe and we know from science of human behavior and what we see that we can change any behavior. We're in control of it. We just have to set those variables and responses in motion, and it will work to kind of actually silence some of that additional chatter that you might have in your brain to make those right decisions, because we're working in a contingencies of, again, reinforcement or what we term punishment, either the increasing or decreasing of a certain response or behavior that we're doing. Again, having to do with choices over what we eat, how we train, and those types of things. And I've had a lot of my history as a behavior analyst, as a doctor of applied behavior analysis is I've worked within special education, with students, with teachers training them. I've worked with school administrators. I've worked with leadership programs and various other settings. And now I'm a ultra marathon coach, and I do this. I give programs, but I work fundamentally on changing behaviors with ultra runners. And it's all about making it simple, quieting down all that additional chatter, all those thoughts and things that are fluttering through your brain at all times, so that I set up this pattern of behavior. It's easy for me to select out what to do, when to do it, because I have all the variables set up and the consequences set up so that they are reinforcing. And then we don't have to worry about selecting out on that level what to do, because we've reprogrammed, so to speak, our brain and the behaviors that we engage in.
Well, and this is a big topic in endurance sports, because so many of the people who are in endurance sports are highly successful type A personality types, right? And so they love structure and control and conscious thinking. And when you go into endurance, and particularly ultra endurance, that didactic approach tends to produce some neuroses.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, there's this famous thing a triathlete coach told me one time about, and it's a common joke in triathlons, but like the type A successful executive type A triathletes, paying big bucks for a coach and be able to text them or call them anytime, anywhere. And, at 2 a.m. they're calling the coach up to know whether they put their right foot bike shoe on first or their left foot fight you
Right.
on first at T1. I mean,
Right.
they're getting that granular about stuff, and it's it's creating a dynamic that's not sustainable and a setup for failure.
Right. I should be, as a coach, I should be empowering my athlete. And again, going back to science of human behavior, that's what we're doing. We're empowering the individual to be able to learn and set up variables that set up for good responses and behaviors that they continue to do. If I train you and I'm working with you, and then you can't replicate what I've been telling you on race day, then as a coach, I've failed. But if we integrate behavior analysis in the way that we're coaching, and then we can show up on race day and my runner or my athlete on any level can make the right decisions and engage in those appropriate responses, troubleshooting when it's 3 a.m. in the middle of a 100-miler and figuring out, all right, my leg's not broken. Why is there pain? It's a nutrition thing. I've got, what they can do in the moment decisions, or empowering them to, what is controllable, what's uncontrollable, how do I select for the right response in that moment? Those are all things that I want to work towards. And those are things that, athletes should have those tools in their toolbox, not calling their coach in the middle of the night going, holy cow, I don't know. Do I make a right turn or a left turn? Well, we should have practiced that in training, and then it should be carried over, and it should be, I have that tool. I'm practicing that tool on race day. I know how to execute it. And you almost don't have to think about it because you've practiced it. Those variables are set up and you can move forwards. And that's what the beauty here is I can give a runner practice like they would practice going out on a 10-mile run and holding a certain pace. And I can say, all right, so that's what your performance looks like. But what other tools do we have? You got to practice your visualization. You're going to practice self-talk during those practice runs. So then on race day, you immediately, when you see that certain triggers or certain environmental variables, you go right into that response. And it's been reinforced. So you keep doing it, and it helps you to maintain the performance level that you've trained at. Because I think that there's a huge difference and a gap between how we train and then what happens on performance day for a lot of, and I'm not talking about elite athletes, I'm talking about like people like myself that are, signing up for local and regional races. Oh, I did all the training. How come it didn't pan out on race day? It's because we didn't put ourselves in situations that mimicked race day, that race day situation, or I wasn't given the right tools to advocate and empower myself to make those decisions during the race.
Okay, so let me go off on a slight detour that's germane to the conversation, and let's juxtapose the two concepts of play and fear.
Yep.
Because I think it's really important that the coach and athlete get into a relax, and when they're training, and be able to be willing to let go of being perfect and right and nailing your numbers on your training, and be able to experiment and fail, because and in a way there's no shame, and what works, what doesn't, what consistently works, what consistently doesn't work, based on the variables, the environment, blah blah blah, so that you get this, so that the athlete develops this intuitive sense of what's going on and how to adjust for it. Because so much of today's world is based on no risk, no fear of failing. And then, when you look at a child, like a toddler or a young child that's not had trauma or anything like that, they're playing, and if something doesn't work, it's like, it doesn't work, and they go on to the next thing and try it. And I think we need to develop that kind of stuff, because it takes so much stress off. Yeah,
I agree. And I think we can look at it as a movement from fear and anxiety to excitement and curiosity. And,
that's right.
And when you're like, you people that are like, oh my goodness, I don't know what's going to happen when X, Y, and Z occurs. We need to flip that script and go, well, instead of being afraid of what's going to happen, go, I'm excited. What's going to happen? How will I respond? How will my body meet that experience? And like, what will I find out about myself? And that's a pretty cool thing to be open to. And at the same time, let's be risk takers. I don't see, there's no benefit. We put all this training into, we're doing all this work. Let's take those risks. Let's be adventure seekers rather than fearful of what's going to happen. What's going to happen is most likely, you see something and you fail. And guess what that does? It means the next time you have a little bit more information to work off of. And that's really cool, is if you can learn from your past experiences. And that's how we've all gotten here. Somewhere along the line, you learn that the word for pen was not pencil, but you said pencil, and someone's like, you know what, that's a pen instead. And you learn from that, and you said, okay, that's a pen moving forward. So that's the same thing.
Right, but it's like today's culture and is risk averse. Yeah. And everybody wants to be right. You can see that in national politics right now. We won't go into that.
Yeah, no, I'm not touching it.
but there's like all this shame, and it's like, no, we got to just ditch all that. And it's
look, it's the same as honestly, I don't see there being shame in a DNF. You went out there, you were curious, you had an experience. Maybe you didn't finish the race because something happened, but it means you're a risk taker. We should take risks when it comes to how we're experiencing sport. We can take risk in how we're making choices in our lives. And then, we can get into social media and what that looks like. I think that social media shapes our perspective on risk and our perspective on failure so much. When we see someone that's excelling and every time they go to race, or they're winning, or they're top race and they never drop out of a race and they're having all this success, it makes a feeling of failure of stepping up to the plate, because you're not going to experience the same thing. Or you're like, why can't I be more like them? Do you want to see that success? You want to get all those likes and all that positive feedback. We're so afraid of being unsuccessful or making the wrong choice, and someone going, well, that's because you did X, Y, and Z diet, or because you didn't do X, Y, and Z activity. But I think that there's opportunities to lead with curiosity and go, oh, you know what? Amy took that risk and it didn't pan out, but awesome. You took that risk, and maybe I can learn to take more risks from it. And that's what life is. I mean, what is this saying is like, this is not a dress rehearsal. We're here. Like, don't be afraid of taking that next step, whatever it is, if it's sport or business or leadership roles. Don't be risk adverse. Flip that, reframe it, and think about what might be on the other side. What is that curiosity and excitement? And I think that reframing can really fix a lot of things in your life, because it makes you more open to taking other additional risks and standing up to challenges and so forth.
Okay, I'm going to be the yeah butter here so we can get really big into this, because nobody, unless there's a massive failure, nobody posts their bad stuff on social media. Right. It's probably 80-20. And when they when they post this is the reality, right? Yeah. And when they post their bad stuff, I see these posts, it's like, oh my God, I'd never post that. And the way they post it's like, oh God, what's going on here? So that's what, and it's like you say, this is a BF Skinner thing. This is the environment people are exposed to. Mm-hmm. And so it's leading to behaviors where you got to be right. You can't fail. Nobody else is out there failing, because that's what the environment's showing us.
Right.
And yet, when I say fail, I mean, it just doesn't work. Right. Mm-hmm. Because there's a pejorative attached to the word failure.
Yeah.
And you're talking to somebody who's failed in a lot of sectors of life. But, from that, I've got a rich toolbox of things that I've been able to successfully apply with athletes.
Right. Because when you fail, it creates, you've learned from those processes.
If you're willing to learn from it. Right?
Exactly. And that's what opens up that curiosity. If we are afraid of what happens when we do fail, you do not have that lush background to pull from. I mean, you're right. You are a perfect example of that. And then you have more things that, you have a richer perspective on what can happen. when we go, I'm staying rigid, you limit all of that. You limit your ability to learn and to respond.
Yeah, exactly. And another thing I'll point out right now that I say all the time is like what people don't realize is whether they know it or not, we're all signed up for that ultra called life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like you said, it's the gun's gone off.
Yeah. Look, I often have this conversation with my husband that like, if you're stuck in a job you don't like, if you're stuck in a relationship you don't like, you can change these things. It might not be easy by far. Everyone's got what's going on in their life. Everyone's got all these other pressures and things that are happening. But if you can you are in control. Nobody else is in control of your behaviors. So you can make one small adjustment and take that risk and see what happens. Like that's the beauty. Like we are all just behaving nonstop and having choices of behaviors that have been reinforced and are being maintained. And that's why we're the people we are. It's why we listen to the music we listen to, or might vote the way that we want to vote. I mean, there's external reasons and there's those extrinsic and intrinsic motivators. And that makes us the people we are. There's nothing we're talking about that is deliberate and only kept within the running world or cycling.
And this is the conversation I have with people is like, you have to understand the behavior behind it because people,
yes.
because of our biology as animals, we have this, like I said to you earlier, it's Peter's 2 S's, sex and survival mm-hmm. of the self, survival of the species. And mm-hmm. it's what keeps us going. And so we don't make conscious bad decisions. We make our decisions based on the information and inputs because there's physiological inputs. Like an addict has a physiological input, whether it's carbs or cocaine. Mm-hmm. They have physiological inputs that's driving their thinking and their addiction just as much as the motivating factors of what makes somebody want to run 100 miles, what makes somebody want to do whatever they do. And it's not to, the quote unquote bad decisions or the ones that have the outcomes we don't want. It's not based on some sort of evil for the most part.
Right. So if I can take a moment and go backwards and just explain really clearly for people that are listening, within human behavior, we have 3 contingencies. We have the antecedent, what happens before you do anything. Then you have your behavior, your response, and then you have whatever contingency, reinforcement, or we say punishment that maintains that behavior. So the antecedent.
That's a Skinner box, right?
That's exactly it. So we're talking about, this is what Skinner called operant conditioning, which is different. And I will leave the fancy words behind in a second. But operant conditioning, we have an antecedent, what happens first, then our behavior of interest, what we're looking at, and then the consequence. Now we have Pavlov, and a lot of us are very familiar with Pavlov and Pavlov's dog. You ring the bell and the dog starts salivating. Pavlov, he looked at something, or initially that was respondent conditioning. That was just having that 2 things happening. You have a stimulus in the environment, that bell ringing that has nothing to do with anything for this dog. But then they had the presentation of food, which made the dog salivate. And then when you presented those things together over many, many productions, you ring a bell and the dog started salivating. There was no consequence. So we learn very easily when we present a stimulus, something in the environment with something else. So like the smell of a morning coffee, right? And that's like, smell of morning coffee might get me out of bed to start doing something. So you might have that. And then say you're pretty lazy and you don't want your alarm. The alarm doesn't really do its job. So then maybe you start pairing the alarm and your coffee machine goes off at the same time. So the alarm goes off and the coffee machine has a great smell. Then over many, many times that this is repeated, you just start getting off. You get up because the alarm has been paired with that coffee smell. You're not necessarily an alarm person. but that we leave behind. That's just typical conditioning. And I think a lot of people are familiar with that. Like I smell something and it reminds me of something, or I've had enough opportunities of these two things happening together that there's certain attributes that happen. What we look at in behavioral science is, again, what happens first, then the behavior, and then the consequence that maintains it. And what we can do here is we have an opportunity to change that consequence. And when we change that consequence, that's when we can change that behavior in question, right? So like if we're talking about, we can talk about increasing that behavior, which is when we say we reinforce it, or decreasing that behavior, which is when we call it punishment, which isn't the greatest word colloquially used because punishment carries a lot of baggage with it, but we use it in the scientific language. So always talking about how we increase or decrease behavioral responses. So when we talk about there's no good or bad behaviors, it's just what we do, it's all been based on how they've been reinforced, maybe socially or biologically in the past. So in cases of addiction, and we can talk about addiction to carbs because I think that that's one, or sugar addiction.
And we should note that addiction to carbs is the same as addiction to anything else: alcohol, nicotine, prescription drugs, illegal drugs.
Yeah, it's because and what maintains it on that consequence then is that great like that feeling that we get. Or maybe it's there's something about it texturally, but there is a reinforcing consequence for engaging that. And then what you have to do is break and choose a consequence or that we're going to start driving down the behavior of eating those carbs.
Right. But let me interject there.
Yeah.
So, you have to help people understand that it is a psychological and a physiological addiction.
Absolutely.
And when you take away those carbs, that physiology is going to give a reinforcing consequence that you need your carbs.
Right. So what you have to do is what we look at in behavioral science is finding we call it a functionally equivalent response. Okay. So if you take away those carbs, right, that's eating those carbs is that behavior and choice. Your body is going to have a reaction and it's going to say, we want those carbs. I'm feeling sluggish. I don't know. Maybe I'm cranky, or I miss the texture of eating those things, or I miss eating. I'm just gonna say I love peanut M&Ms, and sometimes I like just they're paired also like with things that you're doing in your environment, like watching a movie and eating popcorn. They're together, but you have to find then a functionally equivalent response, and it might be choosing an alternative nutrition option that's going to either alleviate or decrease those feelings that you're missing those carbs. Or you find an alternative that it gets reinforced, right? And you are starting to create new habits and new formations. And that's where you can start introducing alternatives to the situation.
Or let me frame it this way, because that psychological and physiological addiction is real, and there is a negative consequence that reinforces the carb thing. So unfortunately, the problem is we don't see people until they've already got significant addiction where it's impairing their energy, like they're bonking and hitting the wall, or they got GI distress. Those are the negative consequences. And so all of a sudden they get to the point where, as much as I love my carbs, I'm having these episodes, right? But the thing I want to try to help people understand is that the basic concept that we all can agree upon is too much sugar is not a good thing for your health or performance, right?
Yes.
Nobody's going to deny that, but people have no idea just how much they're consuming, right? It's like 155 pounds if you're going to do 100 or a Ironman in the 6 months leading up to into your event, or it's 135 pounds for a half Ironman or a marathon. I mean, and people are shocked when they realize it's that much sugar, but there's this cognitive dissonance until there's a problem. But if people realize what scenario do we do to get people to act proactively before they hit the bonking GI issues and all the downstream impacts on their health that getting to that point causes.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because when you think about it, right, like I've had athletes that I'm talking with, and they're like, oh man, it's like caffeine and sugar and it's all going in. They're constantly chasing that high because then they feel that bonk. And when you start talking to them about, tell me what went on, how did you fuel for this race? What was going on in your training? And they're like, well, I started eating candy. I had my first Mountain Dew at this point. And you're like, wow, so you're constantly having to chase that. And then they start to see it and talk through it. And I find that's successful. But what you're talking about, and again, go back to a behavior analytic principles, we have something called an abolishing operation. And an abolishing operation is just something that we do on that antecedent end. So before we get into all like what we're going to do here with behaviors, it's what we do on the antecedent side that decreases the effectiveness of engaging all these other behaviors. So if I can take something, or if I can fuel ahead of time for my race, and that's on my antecedent side, then it gets the response part. I'm not choosing carbs anymore because I've already taken something in that decreases the necessary moment for, like, it decreases having to engage in that behavior of eating more carbs because I've already consumed something. So if that consumption is something like a Vespa early on, so I've taken that before I started running and I'm feeling really great, it decreases the need for me to start taking in other types of fuel, that behavioral piece. And then I don't have those negative consequences of bonking when it comes to, because I'm not engaging in those carbs and I'm not chasing after it. So it's keeping me stabilized. So that's what we're really looking at is, can we change something on that antecedent side? Can I change the nutrition that's going in my body while I'm training? Can I change the nutrition that's going in my body while I'm racing so that I don't engage in eating of certain types of things? And we'll say simple sugars, like I'm not eating peanut M&Ms and Reese's and all those things during race, and they don't bonk because I've already stabilized everything at the start. So that's
you can have those things during a race, but you're not dependent upon them.
Correct.
You're not right,
it's
and you're not having them by your computer screen during the day, and you're just constantly hitting that
absolutely
high, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of things that we look at. What do we do on that antecedent end to establish good habits? Like, what do we do here? We have these products in home. We have healthy eating options already. So then, we do this on, if you're having like a weight loss journey, oftentimes the number one thing as an intervention is don't have it in the house, right? If you don't have the food in the house, and you won't eat it. So, but if you also are full and fuel on healthy choices and really great choices. And again, if we're going to go with a healthy eating weight loss journey, maybe it's high fiber that fills you up in protein on one end. And then I'm not searching because I'm full longer for snacks and food in the middle of the day. And that creates a decrease in that response. So we're looking at something very similar when we're looking at training, race nutrition, et cetera, and changing any type of habit you might have.
Yeah, no, and that's a big thing. Why don't you talk also about cognitive dissonance? Because that's a big one, because in terms of getting people to change, because like I said, today's world is just rigged against us, right? We have all these entities that are trying to offer us something. And like I said, it's well intended, but like the whole snack food industry shouldn't exist by and large, right? And it's like snack food should be a fraction of what they are, just like statin drugs. Like there are situations where a statin is the called for thing, but it amounts to about 2% of the total statin sales.
Yeah.
Right. And same thing with snack foods. The snack food industry is huge. A lot of the common quote unquote healthy foods we eat their market is healthy. Right. So we have this barrage of information that's got people thinking because they're basing their decisions based on the thing, and then all of a sudden those processed foods reinforce that.
Absolutely.
Right. And so there's a cognitive dissonance when you come to somebody and say, well, you need to change your metabolism.
No, I believe this, but no, you believe one thing and you act a different way, right? That's what we're talking about. Or I want to make this choice in my life, but I keep on engaging this way. Now, I think I've read, what is it called? Oh, there's a wonderful book about processed foods and how they're made to create this addiction in ourselves. And it's a wonderful read. And I'm reading this book and I'm like, I'm going to make all these choices and I'm going to do better and not have all these processed foods. Ultra processed people, I believe, is what the book's called. And we're tricked into thinking that we need all these things because of texture and taste and things have been manufactured to keep us going. And that's the same thing if we go back to social media and how that works. It is configured in a way. I feel like there's the greatest behavior analysts are behind social media ads because it all works in a way that is triggered off of what we like, our motivations and our reinforcement. And that's what
Amy, I'm going to interject right now because the guy I know who is a acolyte of BF Skinner who worked, he told me that during COVID, some behavioral analysts who are BF Skinner people were paid millions of dollars to orchestrate a lot of the government policy implementation.
I've said it many times that if I was into politics, I would be a great mayor. I think behavior analysts, we know how to alter and change, but like on a grand scale, like you can see how human behavior and how human engagement, and there's a lot of like data mining now, and there's commercials about data mining being huge companies are looking at how people interact with their ads, and then they're pulling out that information, and then they're feeding it back to you exactly what you want. And that's why this cognitive dissonance is so challenging, I think, right now, because you're just looking at a difference between how I want to behave and how I am behaving, because you're being thrown at you all of this information that just feeds on all of your past and consistent responding history. So it's like, I know I should be better and I shouldn't eat this, but boy, this bag of Tostitos, the crunch, the saltiness, it just keeps you going eating it. It's the same thing. I should stay off my social media and mindlessly scrolling, but everything it's feeding back to me in this loop tells me, it feels good. So it's the same thing between, I want to improve as an ultra runner. I want to improve my nutrition and I want to improve my endurance and I don't want to have gut and GI issues. Wonderful. That's my goal for this race. But I'm so used to seeing everybody else taking in, gels and carbs and carbo loading the night before and all these things. That must be the right way to do it, right? So it's very hard for us to start breaking that unless, again, we go back to being curious and having a sense of, let me try it. Let's see what happens this time. And boy, I might be surprised by what happens if I try to have different nutrition or try to turn my phone off. I'm not missing anything, or put that bag of Tostitos down. Let's just see what happens and have that sense of curiosity over failure.
Yeah, it's a big thing because I think that a lot of this, what we humans, because we're making thousands of decisions each day, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're being bombarded with all this information, and that information has been organized not to empower us, but to get us to react. I said to you earlier, modern technology, the modern man-made construct we live in, is so far removed from the natural world that we evolved in that it's pinging some very primitive fight or flight hardwiring in us on a chronic basis. And there's a reason for that, to me, is that it gets people to react.
Yeah.
When you got fear, and it also keeps them locked into a very narrow thought process, because I found that when people have fear, both conscious and subconscious fear, they're entrenched in a certain way of thinking.
Yeah.
And it's hard for them to step back and say, maybe I was wrong, or they don't even have to say they're wrong about something, or their influencer was wrong about something, but they just say, well, maybe that other way will work, or maybe it worked.
Right.
You know,
Like, yeah, absolutely. You can say, you know what, I have this fear, identify that I have this fear, and and it's there, but let's like stuff that down. Let's just drop that for a second and let's see what an alternative, like let's turn purposely towards, again, curiosity, excitement, adventure, or just trying something new and see what that person could be wrong. That laser removal of whatever is getting on your thing can be wrong. That I don't need all that newfangled, gels or whatever. That could be wrong. Let me turn and try something different. And I think it's okay to identify and go, that makes me nervous, or that makes me fearful, but what if? And you can put those things like metaphorically away. And like,
right.
They're not, you don't have to like say they're gone, and we don't have to always reframe it, but you can tuck it away for a little bit of time and make an alternative choice.
Yeah. And so, and with this sort of way that this man-made, and I think that that's something I want the audience to really think about. We have this man-made construct that's just completely bombarding people daily with this information and messaging about certain ways. And then we subconsciously make we cast our fate with whatever thing meets our confirmational bias, right? And that's a complex, multivariate thing we won't get into. But once you've done that, then you get into this tribalism, which, national politics is is a perfect example of how everybody gets in their tribes. And in ultra endurance sports and endurance sports, you have a high carb camp, you have the paleo keto camp, and nobody talks to this. It's like, folks, you need to step back and say, no, I want my camp. Like we started off the conversation, we're individuals, we're an N equals 1. If you want to be optimal, don't do what everybody else is doing.
Absolutely.
You need to be doing.
Yeah, I think that is a great way of summarizing it all. It is unique unto yourself. And it's like the same thing with coaching. I'm not going to give the same coaching plan to everybody just because I think that, coaching by heart rate or coaching by pace or by hour or even, rate of perceived effort works for one person doesn't mean necessarily that that's what everybody needs to be doing for their coaching plans and for their running plans. It's the same thing. Like you figure out what is unique for that person, how you tap into their motivating system and their success. It's the same thing with all of this feedback you're getting. I think we need to be more inquisitive. If I'm a new ultra runner and I'm looking for a coach and I'm looking for nutrition, I need to go out and educate myself first on what the diversity is. And I think that that's something that we often skip, and we go, I'm going to go to a coach and I'm going to have the coach select this out for me and tell me what I ought to be doing. And I think that that's problematic because a lot of coaches don't have experience with the variety of things that are out there as well. And they're not learning from their past history. They're there, we're coaches, we're running a business. We want successful athletes. We want people to be happy, but oftentimes not also leading with curiosity because you don't want to fail. It's the same thing, but there's a lot of information out there. Go seek good information. Go read the research that's out there on the different forms of nutrition, on the different ways of training and what your different options are. And then you can make the best decision for yourself, leading to the best coach for yourself as well. And all those things make you the greatest advocate for yourself and develop also key skills that you need as an athlete and as a human to be successful, which is, good self-concept, good self-reliance, and then you become your ultimate advocate for yourself and you can, be successful in life. And I think that's what we're talking about,
Yeah. And I think that another point I'd like to make, because, I approach this not as a diet or nutrition or fueling. It comes to your basic, your foundational physiology and metabolism, because it starts there. And it really starts on your fat metabolism, because that's what we're meant to metabolize aerobically. Unfortunately, we've taken ourselves far afield of that. But the point I wanted to make for people is, we're doing these things to challenge ourselves, right? When we're doing endurance sports, it's there to challenge yourself. So the challenge, part of that should be to challenge yourself that if it's something that doesn't meet your bias or you don't understand because it's not in your worldview, challenge yourself to look into it. Because I lose people because I'm not talking about what's I'm not looking at something based on the nutrition, fueling, diet, training.
Yep.
I'm looking at this. I'm looking at things on the cellular level and the mitochondrial level. It's like, okay, what are we going to do to make these cells really perform and be robust? And so that on race day, you can burn some mitochondrial matches or in a hard training day, but when you take those matches out, the adaptation is going to put more matches back in, and you're just going to get, but that, you know, when I'm talking about that loses people, because it's not like take 200 calories an hour. Right.
What you want people to do is, and I think, you know, you and I have had an ongoing conversation throughout the last year where I was like, I want to try this. I saw somebody use it and it was successful. What I'm referring to is the Vespa product, but it took me having conversations and then testing it out, using different fueling strategies. And I think that that's what a lot of endurance athletes, we want a quick fix and we want to see that it works immediately, or like somebody to tell us.
They don't want to be wrong, so they go.
Right, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and it's hard to do something that's different than what the other people you might be at on a training run is doing. So you have to try and say, you know what, I'm going to give this a try. And it's not like, sometimes it's not, this hit my gut and I felt nauseous, so I'm never going to use this again. It's being aware of your body and movement and how you feel, and that self-awareness of you as an athlete, and having a little more mindfulness about how you're feeling during a run to really understand how a product is working. And I think that that's what we're, you know, when you and I are talking about this is really just getting down to it, is like, again, empowering a person to try things that are new. Don't be afraid of being different. I mean, in life, in running and endurance sports, then, and take a step aside and see what's successful and works. And if it doesn't work, that's great. At least you have that experience. If it works, you have a new tool to use, and then you figure out what do I do next? And you start asking those questions. We should all be little scientists and try to explore. And it all goes back to, you know, talking about children and how when we're kids, we just have reckless abandon. We're doing whatever. We go run down the street as fast as we can. We're not afraid of bonking. You just run until you can't any longer.
Right.
You know, and that's it. We're trying new foods and I spit it out because I don't like it. But no one's telling me I need to like X, Y, and Z. We don't realize those things. Like, it wasn't cool to be eating this until you get to school and you start getting feedback from people. And that's what the problem is when you start to talk about these different camps within, it can be regionally, it can be within sports, it can be in politics, it can be religion. I want to do what I want to do. It doesn't frame who I am and my sense of belonging to a group. And we should all strive to be individuals and do what's best for ourselves and what we hold as values, and be driving towards the values that we want in our lives or in running.
And we can contribute to the collective, right? The social good, but we should be supporting each other in the individual journey. And like, one of my, you know, when you're talking about this, I couldn't help but go back to one of my pet peeves, and that's young adolescent women. You know, when they get into their teenage years, they become very cliquish and very tribal. And, you know, at the time when they're physiologically developing their reproductive system, right? Back to the 2 S's, they're focusing on this plant-based, don't want to kill animals things, when they should be eating these nutritionally dense, not a lot of sugar, carbohydrates in them, nutritionally balanced foods that cultures traditionally fed young women and pregnant women over centuries, because they knew it. And it's like, oh, you can't have fish roe or liver or all these, you know, or meat, you know, because all of a sudden you're killing animals and nobody wants to kill animals. I mean, we're so far removed from that cycle of life that
and I think it can be said about I think you're talking about like best physical fitness for a group, and I think we can talk about that for best physical fitness for any group. It's because of, again, I think we're so glued. I mean, I'm going to go back to it, social media and what we're being told. If I open my phone and look at like how many things come up about the amount of protein I should be eating, or like, oh, don't drink this because it's got calories and fat. We're making these things evil, there's no good and it's like there's no good and bad behaviors, there's no good and bad foods either. We need everything so that we can develop and we can be the healthiest we can be. And by demonizing these things, we inadvertently create populations of people that refuse to be individuals and like what they like. I mean, I grew up.
We create fear, and then we can control them. And a perfect example of that is LDL cholesterol.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it's made to be the villain, and yet LDL cholesterol is what your liver puts out to make your body. It packages up the energy, the lipoproteins that make up your cells, your mitochondria, your hormones, your enzymes. That's what LDL it's and what people don't get is the inability to properly metabolize the LDL. And so you create these villains, and then you can create fear, and then you can control. Mm-hmm. And that's me with my tinfoil hat on. We got our and I'm riding. But that's, you know, it goes back down to these basics. So I would say, and you as a psychologist can talk about this. It's like, I was saying this earlier, we've abandoned the basics for the latest shiny object.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And we need to get back to those basics. And so people need to be willing to listen to a message, and does it make sense to them? Even to challenge their belief systems. You know, like I don't think that, you know, what we're doing is here with OFM is supporting people to get back to their native physiology, and your work is part of that support, getting people to get off that fear and that control and where they're not, and start thinking and empowering themselves.
Right. Again, as a behavior analyst, what we try to do is like, what behavior am I steering away from? What behaviors am I going toward? What am I avoiding? What's aversive to me? And what behaviors do I readily engage in? And if these things, if I'm leading with this is aversive and I'm avoiding engaging in certain types of things or eating certain things, or I'm afraid of this, what is it about that I can address? So yeah, let's try to change things. Let's try to say, hey, let's give it a try. Let's be unique. Let's go on this adventure and see what might happen and what those consequences are. You might feel great. Who knows? But you don't know unless you give it a try. And that's what we're trying. But there is, you know, people need to be explorers. People need to go out and not, you know, it's not like we have this, you know, ability to look at Google and get the right answer in a second now. And that has made a failure of people being able to, you know, well, you tell me the answer instead of you going out and finding that answer. And as the scientists, we're looking at, well, what does the evidence show? What do I know? Where do I get these responses instead of just you tell me, okay, you think that this is the best option for me, but why? What is the science behind it? And that's what I really, you know, that's the question that I ask about interventions. I ask about, you know, why people are engaging. What's the science behind it? Or what is the function? What does that behavior do for you? What is not choosing this or not, you know, leading with fear? What does that get you? It gets you, you know, we have fear for a reason, right? Like, look both ways before you cross the street. We've developed that because you should have a healthy fear of like crossing the highway and getting hit by a car. I live in South Florida. I have a healthy fear of alligators. I would not, you know, there's certain things that I'm fearful for, but taking challenges and living our lives, like if you have a fear there, how can we start decreasing that fear? And it's starting, again, I'm going to say it again, leading with this thought process that this is, I'm curious, I'm excited. There can be different outcomes that I'm being told by other people. And what can those look like? And I think that that's something that like you can take in daily life. If I choose to change one thing today, I choose to try one new food, or I normally go on my walk and I hang a right. What happens today if I go left? Like those are things that we can experiment in our own lives and lead with a little bit of curiosity, and we'll have success.
A lot of curiosity.
Yeah.
You know,
well, and that's it. Like Buck, when it comes to social media and what you should be wearing and what you should be eating, they don't know you. You know, they're not paying you. That's the thing. Like,
well,
you're an individual.
And to bring it back to what I was saying earlier about going back to the basics,
Yeah.
This is what the modern man, we've so ensconced ourselves in this modern technology, man-made construct that we forgot that. And a perfect example, when you said, talking about crossing the road, look both ways, right? Not get hit by a car. That's like the lion jumping out or the warring tribe coming to get you, right? But in terms of those basics, and this is like where I want to challenge people on their cognitive dissonance about our approach, right? Getting back down to the, you know, a metabolic and physiological foundation that mimics our native one, our ability to think for ourselves and problem solve, right? A perfect example is like what's happened effectively in the real world in application. What's happened with all this push towards safe cars? We've got cars with cameras, airbags, structures are made to, do people drive better? They don't.
Yeah.
They're scrolling on their phone. They don't, they're ensconced in these wonderful vehicles that can take us down the road at 150 feet per second. And we have no idea that we're traveling that way. Whereas, you know, in the old days, when you were driving, you knew you were driving, you had to pay attention. And
well, I think if you go with this driving, this whole idea of driving, the metaphor there, like when seatbelts were introduced for the safety of the drivers, nobody wanted to use seatbelts. And then you became like, well, there's a punitive measure if you get pulled over without a seatbelt, but we created a really annoying dinging noise until you put your seatbelt on, right? The seatbelt is there to protect you, but I don't want to do this. I'm not doing this. This is something new. So we had to put in a measure that it's so annoying to the driver or to the people in the car that like we're forced to put a seatbelt on because I know this is good for me, but I'm going to choose not to do it. That is kind of like the story here. And there's your cognitive dissonance, right? I know it's good for me, but I'm choosing not to do it. You know, I have all this information that maybe OFM is right for me, but I'm choosing not to do it because I don't know, you know, like no one else is doing it. And I just, that's how I feel, but give it a try because maybe guess what? In a collision, you survive because you were wearing your seatbelt. You're going to have a much better, you know, your whole body is going to be changed. Your metabolism is going to be changed. And you're going to, you know, be a much healthier person. It's the same, you know, that analogy can work there.
Well, and the same, and I'll do a different variation. It's like, these life-saving things that are in cars today, it's all great, but we abandon the basics. But what's happening is like, okay, you have an accident, the airbag's deployed, your car's totaled. Well, you start, but you were scrolling on your phone when you went through that red light, or you went plowed right into the person who stopped in front of you. It's like, do you need to get to that point?
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly it. Do you need to get to the point of adrenal failure to make the decision that you need to change something? Exactly. And that's the thing. Let's go back to this behavioral model, right? That I was talking about, antecedent, our behavior and the consequence. If, you know, we change on that antecedent side, how my relationship with nutrition is, and I start making better nutritional changes, and my body's going to respond differently, I'm going to have a much healthier system moving forwards. And I'm not going to have high cortisol levels, and I'm not going to have all these failures of my system and feeling sluggish and all this other things, because I've made all these variable environmental changes here so that I'm engaging differently when it comes to my behavior of eating or nutrition and training and all these other pieces.
Okay, so question. Let's find an actionable path here for our audience. So I think the first thing is for people to realize how much a lot of the messaging today has got them in a subconscious fear mode. So what would you suggest in terms of behavioral application to step back from that fear? Because you need to be able to first step back from the fear to be able to start thinking and being curious. We want to generate that sense of wonder, that curiosity, that childlike, you know, that childlike thing that like, I'm excited talking to you about this. We're outliers. We're outliers.
No, I think that you pick one behavior And it's not something big and scary. It's not like I've never been on a roller coaster and then I choose to go on an upside down roller coaster. That's not what we're talking about. I've never run further than a 10K. I'm going to run a 50K. We're not talking about these giant leaps.
We're not going to go from being carb addicted to never having carbs again.
Correct. That's not what we're looking at all. And I will go back. I will always say there's room for peanut M&Ms and probably peanut butter Reese's. There's a lot of room for carbs if you do your work to build the metabolic capacity. Yes, and there are things that being curious and having a sense of adventure and changing small things does not mean you change everything and your whole lifestyle and it ruins going to birthday parties and events and things like that. What I'm going to say is that you choose one small behavior, one small, easy to change choice in your life. And if it's like, oh, you know what? I've always thought about what it'd be like. I like regular milk, but I want to try something. This seems very trivial, a non-dairy milk alternative. Try buying, next time you go to the supermarket, instead of buying milk, regular milk, dairy milk, you buy oat milk or almond milk and you give that a try. What's the problem? You give it a taste, you don't like it, at least you gave it a try, or you order that differently at Starbucks, your regular drink. I think that those, like, it can be so mundane and small, but we break a pattern of our traditional behavior, and it takes one behavior to break that pattern and to go, oh, that wasn't so bad, and I actually like that more, to then move us along a path where we can make bigger changes and bigger changes. So like, again, if it's like, I always go out for my 5K run and I do the same loop one day a week. Let's challenge that. Go out on your 5K run. And instead of doing the same loop, if a light turns green, you keep moving forwards. That light turns red, you turn left. Like, have a sense of curiosity in one thing that maybe seems trivial to you, but can then open the door for greater success down the road. And that's how I think that you start to wedge little behavior change into your life. And I think also, if there's certain things that you always hold close to yourself as things that you need to do, and you don't allow other people to do those things as well, that can lead to some behavior change. And trusting other people and advocating for yourself, because that will help you have a better sense of identity to make choices that are better for you in the long run as well. So those things.
Learning to get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah, exactly. So give up. If you're the person that always walks the dog, but you have a husband that's willing to walk the dog, and you say, no, let your husband walk the dog one time. See that the world's not going to end. I think that they are small little things that we can give up that will give it a sense. And that, of freeing yourself a little. And every time we have an opportunity to free ourselves of certain constraints, we become better decision makers and advocates for ourselves, because we create a better self-identity for ourselves as well. So
yeah, and I think that's really valid, because we see this continually with the people who've gone the whole stretch with OFM. They after a while, that those little changes snowball into big changes, and the next thing you know, it's a complete lifestyle change. And I've had so many people tell me, you couldn't have told me that I wouldn't need all these gels and I wouldn't keep from bonking if I just did this. Or like, there's so many athletes I've worked with who love their carbs, right? And I tell them, we're not going to get rid of them entirely, but we're going to restrict them for a few months. And as soon as they actually, I see that they've made that metabolic shift, I'll say, okay, go out and have beer and pizza with your friends. I'll encourage them to do that. Yep. And every time I hear back from them that it was fun while they did it, but an hour later and for the next 3 days, they could feel the inflammation, the constipation, the achy joint. And it's like having those carbs once in a while wasn't the end of the world. They enjoyed it, but it was also a reminder why they do it, and it changed the behavior, right?
Yeah. And I think we can look at other diets and cultures around the world and what people lead and what they're successful doing, and they're not a carb heavy also diet. And like, again, look into those things. If you have curiosity, see what's happening beyond your region, beyond what we're doing here in the United States, and
beyond what the tribe is saying you're supposed to do.
Exactly. Go explore, see. I think one of the coolest things that I've watched, and this is learning from experience and learning from his peers, Jim Walmsley going out after failing at UTMB, going out and living along the court and living with people training in Europe and eating the diet that was going on there and embracing the training systems, because what was going on for him in the United States, and that was not working. So then you go, okay, what possibilities lie elsewhere? And that's a huge extreme for a pro athlete of his caliber to take a risk like he did, and it paid off ultimately, right? So like here,
go live in a different country where you're speaking a different language.
Correct.
Different food options.
Yeah, and embracing different sports in the off season. I think that we can look to those types of models for success, but we don't have to mimic those models, right? But we can see someone living courageously like that. And what I always respect about Jim Walmsley too is like it started in failure. He has not been afraid to fail and then learn from failure. So again, leading with what if I try this? If I train differently, can we get better and different outcomes? Let's live an excitable life outside of being mediocre and see what happens and take those challenges on. And I think that he's just one model of where that worked out successfully. Now he's got a lot of biological biology on his side and genetics. And
he does have a genetic gift, shall we say, but that's fractional. There's a lot of runners out there. Kilian Jornet, he doesn't have the same genes as Jim, but he grew up running and hiking in the mountains.
Yeah. So you have to Jim made, there's choices made, right? Like he could have stayed and continued doing the training that he was doing, but and there's resources involved, but I'm just saying as a model of doing something that's exciting, doing something that can create courage and trying something new. I know with the people I coach, my runners, my athletes, I'm like, they go, I would like to do this race. And I'm like, does this race excite you? Like you're going to put in all this time and all this work, and there might be failure involved. We can do everything preemptively so we can not have failure. But are you excited and are you curious about what could happen out there? Is this an adventure for you? If the answer is yes, let's put our time into it and let's try. But if you're like, your motivation is much lower to even try these things, and then you're more likely to fail at trying out new things as it comes along or putting the work in. And it's the same because you're not excited by it. So again, don't lead with fear, don't lead with mediocre and just being complacent about how you are feeling, because you can get to a better place. I think people don't realize how much better they can feel until they make the change. Like, oh, I didn't realize I was bloated all the time until I stopped eating X, Y, and Z or changed that. I know for myself, that was something I was like, oh, that's amazing. I took out certain things in my diet and I felt immediately better. And it turned out certain things I was allergic to as well. You don't know that until you start to experiment, right? So I think all of those things are just small bits of the same puzzle that we're kind of like putting together.
Yeah, no, this is wonderful. All right. So let's we're going to, you'll be on our team and your specialty. If people want to contact you, we'll refer you over for the sports psychology, right?
So, I do, I have a coaching company, Banana Champs. It's a performance coaching and behavioral consulting. It's within applied behavior analysis, and utilizing all these things that we've talked about today in working athletes to become the best that they absolutely can be on the performance side. And I also work with coaches as well, so that they can become the best coaches and look to writing the best plans and motivating their athletes and getting the most out of how they're coaching.
Wonderful. And we'll get you all set up with OFM for you and your clients and get that foundational physiology and metabolism going to support what you're doing and vice versa, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're going to have a nice little collaboration here.
Well, it's not going to be little. It's going to be huge.
Yeah. And I'm excited. I'm super excited because and Peter knows this. I'm going to share this with everybody. I got together and talked to Peter last year before I ran Cocodona 250, and Peter came and found me on the course and found my crew.
I kept missing you.
Yeah, you did. You missed me. We found each other later after I had finished in the hotel lobby, and we've been going back and forth for quite a long time. And I was recently, after Cocodona, I saw Peter at Western States where we were hanging out, and Peter was so generous to share some Vespa products with me, which I then took into training for my most recent ultra, where it was a 125-mile race through Miami, an urban ultra where we were given new directions every 15 miles of how to get through this. So you can imagine, not a very, very, very hot race, very different than Cocodona. And your mental and cognitive abilities need to really be intact because you're reading directions and every 15, you don't know where you're going. And I used Vespa and the products through my training and then throughout the race, and was very, very happy with the outcomes. I'm very pleased because I was able to stay fueled and stay positive throughout the entire race and be able to cognitively be able to function at a high level, which I think is one of the biggest problems when we're fatigued and we're hungry and our brain is starved. So I was really happy. So then I contacted Peter and we began to have this conversation.
How was the recovery?
The recovery was really quick. And I felt really good afterwards. And I was very, very pleased. And of course, like, please understand, like, I supplemented, and we had talked about this. I supplemented Vespa I had protein shakes while I was working in Whole Foods at certain points, so that I was still taking in calories and real food along the way. But we had a steady, I think it was every 3 hours, I had a Vespa, and that's how I had trained. So afterwards, I was very happy with how that race went. Very happy. I was, very, very pleased with how recovery went, and we reestablished our conversation, our communication, and really feel like a collaboration between what I'm doing and what you're doing here with OFM and Vespa makes a lot of sense. So that's how this happened.
Yeah, no, and like I said, the more I've worked with Vespa over all these years, and I've been exposed to it since a month before Western States in 2006. Product's been out since 2000. The more impressed I am with it, but I won't sell it as a silver bullet or a magic pill, magic potion, because it's one really great tool to support your native physiology and metabolism. And that's all I try to do. We've got it wrong as humans. We've shifted our physiology and metabolism toward this carb-dependent model. And we've got data now on athletes like Jeff Browning and Peter Mortimer. Peter Mortimer just won the man against horse 50 miler again. Yep. So there's been 4 times the human has beat the horse. And it's been Nick Curry and Peter Mortimer, and they've all been using the Vespa and following the OFM protocols. Because, that's why we store a lot of fat on our body. That's what we're meant to burn aerobically. And glucose and glycogen are our fight or fight and our bridge fuel. And we have robust stores of both. And this thing that that tells you all this messaging that, oh, you're scarce on glycogen, you're going to use up all your glycogen. It's because we're using our bodies completely wrong and creating this dependency. And, when I look at the downstream consequences, like you noted, the focus of your race, that's what I call being on your blood sugar stable and not on the blood sugar roller coaster. And that's what happens when you're on a carb dependent diet, is like you say, your brain gets deprived of glucose. And because of the glucose intake, you're not making ketones, you're not making glucose from liver fat. So you're even more deprived. So it's just constantly looking for that next hit.
Right. And I think that, we've discussed kind of how we move this along. And as a person that is very science driven, we talked about oh, pardon my dog and the mailman. We're looking at how we can kind of evolve this and look at kind of more scientifically too, and how, you know, we can look at an N of one, and we can start doing more research on, you know, how this affects runners. And I think we can take more anecdotal data, but we can look at kind of benchmarks,
Yep.
And really start driving foundational research that shows this kind of lifestyle change altogether has these ultimate benefits. Because again, you can look clearly at the runners that you named and other runners that are utilizing the product or are living an OFM lifestyle, and you can see the benefits. But I think that if we were learning certain things and we want to drive the field to be more successful, and we're telling people to be, you know, to try new things, and as a scientist we're doing that, then we have to have that science backing. And I think if we can be
I get that, and that's been something I've had to learn to get. And you know, we've got data, but it's what I found, and there's a very famous video by Alan Savory on that about what is science. And it's very hard when you're doing the true innovation to pierce those walls, because, you know, you got the keto camp and it's all about a ketogenic diet and ketones, which ketones are really a proxy for beta oxidation, which is the true fat burning state. And then you got the high carb camp, and they're all about performance, but they don't want to talk about the unintended consequences of that much sugar, right? And so those are very entrenched things in today's science. There's not that science lacks curiosity today. It's all about papers, publish or perish. And I get it. You need data, but we've lost that. And it's like Alan Savory says in this video about what is science, you know, versus academia. He says the finest candle makers could not imagine light bulbs. Right. So a lot of times the institutional science is really hard. And it's like I say, you know, we base the modern sports diet, nutrition, fueling is all based on a flawed assumption that humans are meant to burn carbohydrates.
Yes. Right. You can't imagine something until somebody does it, right? You can't break this marathon barrier until somebody does it. It blows your mind to think that we can go sub 2 hours until somebody is able to do these things. So like the same thing, like I can't, this whole idea blows my mind until I see somebody being successful. And then you got to show me how, pull back the curtain and show me how it works.
Yeah. And we have data on that, but of course it's not published data, meaning we're not, because we're still, you know, kind of outside that. I'm trying to get those kind of studies going, but you know, like Dr. Edwards, who's part of our team, and he lives near you. He was in France because he's doing his PhD with Veronique Bilat of Bilat Training. He's famous in the marathon stuff for interval training with elite athletes. He asked me for the data, and he showed it to her, and she's like, had a hard time believing it.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is like, look, we have a medical field that like tells you rate how much pain you're in from 0 to 10, and my rating and your rating and a third person's rating are going to be different. How we account for certain things is really subjective, right? I can tell you I'm feeling great during this race, and I know I feel better today than I did 3 weeks ago when I hadn't changed this, but I might have a hard time describing exactly what those medical markers are. But if like how that emotion, that feeling is, but if we can say, look, it's going to decrease X, Y, and Z, it's going to have these medical pinpoints, that I think, you know, that's where research hinges. But it's in a hard place, because it was like, oh, I must feel better because I had all these carbs. I must feel better because I did all these things. But you don't really know what feel better is. And some of it's just a placebo. I had a great race. Well, it was 10 degrees cooler that day than it was that race the year before. That could have factored in. So there's all these other additional pieces that we have to learn. How do we objectively measure what we're terming, you know, success for an OFM diet? But we, you know, or a lifestyle, and how do we pull that away from all these other pieces? And how do you say, oh, I'm much more successful when I race and I have this many carbs? We have to figure out, we call that the functional relationship between, the intervention or what you're putting in and what those outcomes are.
Well, and we have some athletes, like they're doing their N of 1, people who are using CGMs, continuous glucose monitors, and they see that stuff in real time, and they see it consistently, how Vespa and OFM stabilizes their blood sugar, right?
Yep.
And they see their performance, and then, in terms of their wattage or whatever with the protocols, and that's where we're working now, is that N=1 science. But it's like I say, when your metabolism and physiology are correct, not debauched, and your biomechanics are correct, the data corroborates the experience. It doesn't drive it.
Right. And I think you have you can have correlations and you have causations, right? Like it's correlated with
less calories.
Yeah. And that's it. And I think that there's different ways that we can look at it. And I think that you're certainly onto something. And I think it's exciting in our field and in racing and in ultra endurance athletes to kind of, when you're like, oh my God, that person just can go on forever. How is it they're so mentally acute? They're fit as can be, and they're just cranking out those miles. And again, you pull back the curtain, it's like, oh, well, this is what they're eating and this is what they're drinking. And it's confounding because it goes against what we've been traditionally taught, which is you need a carb load and you need to keep those carbs pouring in. And I think that again, if you see that as a listener of this and you're like, oh, that's really interesting, go try it out, see what it looks like, see how it feels. And it's not about one product, and it's not about canceling out all these other things in your life. It's about understanding what certain things do and how it works in the biology of the body.
That's correct. And I think a good hallmark of that was when I looked at Jeff Browning's ultra sign up results from, I think it was from Hard Rock 2021 to Hard Rock 2022. He got fifth both times at that. He was literally doing some big event, like 100 milers or over every 6 weeks. I mean, month and a half was he was just riding a wave the whole time. And yet people are looking at him and saying, well, how does he do it? And I just tell people, well, because that's his day job, he's doing everything right. He's got the training, the psychology, he's doing strength training, stretching, all the things that would be ideal in the ideal world. If you wanted to be great at ultra running, he's able to do and be able to just recover from one event and go right into the next.
Yeah.
And
I think that's so it's funny you bring that up now, because I feel like we're ping-ponging around, but that speaks so much into why everyone can't believe everything that they're seeing, and why you're saying, oh, I'm doing this training, why am I not like this person? Because you're not a professional athlete being, having all the resources, and someone's meal prepping and it's hard. And
the recovery, just the time to have downtime.
Yes. And why people lead with fear, why we don't hate these big leaps, is because it's hard. You're not a professional athlete to have somebody fix your nutrition for you and make all these choices and find the time to do all these things in your day. It's the hard choice. So, that's part of it. It's not, Jeff is a great example of a fantastic athlete with resources on his side. And I think that,
by the way, he has a real supportive wife who really runs the house. And Jen, so he's got a team around him, and I'm not knocking it. Like I say, he's the ideal example.
It's amazing,
of what it does. And at 53, he's still at the top of the sport.
Right, and that's the thing, is people have to understand, outcomes are different for everybody based on what your resources are and your time and effectiveness. And you don't see that on social media. You don't see that with your best girlfriend that you're going and running with on Sunday mornings, what she's got and what that lifestyle looks like that also supports them to be able to do that. and that plays all these things like, why can't I be like that person? I'm not going to take I'm doing what they're doing. But no, they have a set of contingencies that sets that up. And I think that, and being able to make that hard decision, like I need to prioritize X, Y, and Z, is part of the reason why we're sometimes it's hard. I'm not doing this. So I just wanted, you brought that up. It just, I think it adds to what we've been chatting about here.
And it's to a point, it's interesting because I've seen several clients do their OFM journey, and by year 2, they're making lifestyle choices where it's not about chasing the buck. It's not that they're not making plenty of money, but they're not chasing the buck in that frantic lifestyle. They're making lifestyle choices where they're prioritizing their health, their relationships, and enjoyment of life, while still being able to function at a high level in their careers and function at a high level as athletes. So it's not, Jeff's doing it perfectly, and that's hard to emulate unless if that's not your day job.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you can reach a highly functional level. I've got an athlete I'm working with right now who's, an executive with Novo Nordisk, and he's traveling all over the world, and he's racing at the elite level in his late 40s, right? Elite ultras, and so he's making it work despite the demands of a high pressure job.
But it goes from what we talked about earlier. Make one change, and it could seem like a hard change. Like I go back to my silly thing. Make one change in the milk that you have in your coffee. Make one change in the milk you buy in the supermarket. Make one change, and you realize it's not that hard and it's not that scary, and it can then roll down the line, and it can have an effect of then you have additional changes that happen, and what was hard is no longer hard, and what was scary is no longer scary. It just creates life choices that then you just, this is part of who I identify as at this point too. And that's how you get to these places. They waking up early. I'm not a person that wakes up early, but try it and see what happens. And now, okay, I can get my workouts in. I have a great breakfast. I get on with my day, and I'm not worried about when I fit my workout in. And then all of a sudden I identify as a morning person, and I can I'm a morning wake up person. It's those little things that start to roll and pick up steam. And it's the same thing here. You make one or two small changes that might be hard or scary, and before you know it, you've set up all these wonderful consequences for you down the road that are no longer hard and scary.
Yeah. And before we close, the next thing I do is like even before you make that change, step out and educate yourself. Start looking around and reading and looking at stuff, because people need to think and not just do, right? They need to think and start using their mind if it makes sense, and really start to develop that, rather than the ability to analyze, consider, is this right for me? Is it wrong with me? Does it challenge my belief systems? Why does it challenge my belief systems? Or are these belief systems belonging to something I've been, indoctrinated with?
Yes.
And then get there, because sometimes like one change we try to get everybody to make is a fairly big change, and we call it the metabolic reset. Because if you're an endurance athlete and you need to eat every 2 or 3 hours, or else you get hangry, whether you're in work or if you're exercising, whether it's ultra running, triathlon, cycling, and you need to be hitting some carbs every 20 or 30 minutes to keep a bonk from coming on, and then if you do too much, you get GI issues. Well, maybe you need to challenge those belief systems and that messaging out there, and do a reset. But a reset is hard.
Yeah.
It's hard, because you have to, you're basically going through detox, right? And this is what we do. Like, we have a pretty effective way, because part of it is exactly what you're talking about with the psychology. We want to make it doable, and like the reset's a 4-week program, because some people need 2 to 3 days if they're pretty metabolically fit. Some people need 2 to 3 weeks, but the reason it's 4 weeks is because the first week is a prep week, right? Don't change anything. Start to clean out the fridge, the pantry, tell your coworkers you're going to be cranky, tell your partner you're going to be cranky and lethargic, scale down your thing, because you know you're going to have some days where you know, before, you know, when you take away the carbs, you can't access the energy you want because your insulin's too high, and it's going to take a couple of days for the insulin to go down and start to, and it you know, it's a process, but sometimes it does take some big initial steps and sticking with it. So educating yourself and understanding why this is happening, and having that, for lack of better terms, a come to Jesus meeting with yourself to say, yeah, I might be an addict, right? Whether caffeine or carbs or nicotine or whatever, you know, you have that, you know, that's empowering, but it takes a lot of humility to get there. And I mean, maybe you have some thoughts on that too. Just coming to terms, challenging your belief systems and coming to terms that you need to make some changes.
Yeah, I think it has to do with, like, I mentioned values before, and identifying what your values are. And if it's moving you, if some of our hard belief systems are just rules that we've set up for ourselves, and we've told ourselves these rules, and we reinforce those rules so long that we confine ourselves here. But if then we look and go, is this rule that I've made, this belief system, moving me towards the values that I hold dear now? You know, it could be biological benchmarks, or it could be races that you want to do. Whatever that value is, if those belief systems are holding you back from it, then you got to do something. You go, well, that's a belief system that I have to fix, and I'm gonna challenge that belief system. And that's how you got to always keep that motivation of what your values are, and strive towards it. And that, I think, setting your goal, letting people know what your goals are, if they're big, they're scary, or even small goals, will help you keep that goal or your values in focus. And then you go, man, this belief system that I've had is misaligned with
it's not moving me towards the goal.
Exactly. It's not moving me towards what I value and the goals that I have. I got to discard it and create a new system. And what's funny is, like, a lot of that belief systems that we have, I've talked a little bit about self-concept of what we develop and how we look at ourselves. Like that helps drive how we view ourselves. But if I can change that belief system and alter essentially how I identify myself, what I do, how I behave, it changes how I believe in myself, or who I am. And sometimes we need to do that. Like, we can become different people. An old dog can learn new tricks. Like, we can change those things. We have that ability. Like I said, you could become the morning person. You can become that early morning runner. You just have to have the support system if that's your value. So yeah, discard those beliefs that aren't aligned with your goals, and start you can write a new narrative about who you are and what you do, and just reinforce it. I am a runner that wakes up early and gets my workouts done. I am a person that, that it moves me closer. I'm going to be uncomfortable for the next week, but I'm not going to eat what I used to eat. And this moves me closer to my success, and I can do hard things. This challenges me, and I can get through this. And the next step that follows will be easier because of it. And I think we just need things aren't going to be easy, but you can start to say, I'm a person that does hard things. And then you can conquer those hard things and move past it. And then you can take that with you for all sorts of different types of things you do in the future.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm thinking from a biological, survival 2 S's thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we're all used to bonking and GI issues in our training and our events, right? It's because, like, in ultra endurance, it's looked upon as a rite of passage or a badge of honor, and everybody laughs about it, blah, blah, blah. But then when you try to explain to people you're going to take their carbs away and their diet and stuff temporarily, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like they're terrified. They can't do it because they have a choice then.
Yeah.
Whereas when it happens in a race and they know it's going to happen because they're physiologically addicted, they accept it as like part of the deal.
Yeah, we have a thing called establishing operations. I talked about abolishing operations that decrease things. Establishing operations in behavioral science and behavior analysis is what makes something important. Like, if I do this, like, I can establish why going through this phase is important for you, because it's tied into, and then we have to look at this. go back to your N of 1, we tied into meaningful belief systems and values for that individual person. So like, it doesn't, I can convince myself because I am very intrinsically motivated to do things. But if I'm not a person that needs it, I need convincing from a coach or from you that this, I need to get through this week because it's going to be better off for me, then let's pull in those, metabolic or biological markers and go, let's take a look at these. This is too high. This is a problem. You got kids, you got a family, you want to be healthy and be able to run around with your kids. We got to decrease this. Going through this is going to help. Or we figure out what is motivation for this person to do this. And then we establish what we call the EO, the establishing operation of why this behavior change is so important to them. And then all of a sudden, once it's meaningful on the individual level, then you get that buy-in. And this works not only for what we're talking about here, but this works if I'm like the head of an organization and I need my employees or the people that I supervise to get on board with a change, like establishing why that change is important to them and why that moves them along. Maybe there's a bonus involved. Maybe it just has to do with their security of their position, but that ultimately creates that, oh man, I better get involved because this really does affect me, and that meaningful value there. So I think if we can people can tie this, hard things, what they have to go through into it becomes very meaningful for their value system, that they're more likely to go through it. When it's not tied to those values and it loses meaning for the individual, then we don't tolerate that change as much.
Yeah. And another comment I wanted to have was, when you're talking about belief systems, and belief systems are very strong, and they seem to be reinforced by messaging. And it's a tactic employed by religions, politicians, governments, but I've thought about this because there's a very nuanced but significant difference between what I call belief and faith. Belief is, that's right, and you're kind of rigid. That's, and that's what creates a belief system. Whereas faith is, you acknowledge you don't know, but you're going to go with it anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're like, if you pick up Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior, he talks about how we have our belief systems and culture and religion and politics and how we develop these things. And it's all within our verbal behavior. It's how we communicate. It's what I tell myself in my mind when I'm thinking. It's what's socially mediated, what people tell me and reinforced. Certain levels of faith, and I think we take faith away from religion, right? We're not thinking about religion.
I'm talking about faith in a conceptual sense.
Exactly. It's totally different. I have faith that this is going to work out because I think it lies with superstition. Like my faith is in it because I have a gut sense. And last time I had a gut sense, it did work out. And like, as a behaviorist, we can explain and conceptualize faith and superstition because it's been that behavior maybe paid off in a way in the past that we didn't expect it. I crossed my fingers and I crossed my toes, and the Yankees just won the ALCS and are on their way to the World Series with the Dodgers. Okay. Did me crossing my toes and my toenails and my fingernails and all these things, did that have an effect on the Yankees winning? No, it absolutely did not. But maybe I do it again, and I recognize you're out on the West Coast and I'm a New Yorker, and maybe we might not agree on baseball, but
I'm not a spectator sports kind of
there
guy.
You go. I know. I mean, I have a lot of analogies in sports, and I've been a Yankee fan my entire life. So it's been a hard last 15 years. So a lot of things can go back to the Yankees now in the World Series. But again, that's engaging in superstitious or faithful behavior. Like, I'm putting it out there. I'm doing this because I have a feeling it worked, or last time I did it, they won. And I think that we have to, that's not really how science works. There's, I'm not going on faith that I'm going to have a good race. I'm going because I know I put all the work in training. I did everything in my nutrition, and I trained myself, and I did all the hard work. So I'm going to have a solid race. I'm not going to have a good race because I just feel like I am, which some people come to the starting line and go, I just feel like it. Well, it's because you did all these necessary steps along the way. And I think it's the same thing with anything that I'm trying to tell athletes. You got to practice visualization, you practice self-mantra, all these, you don't just go, oh, I'm going to do it on race day because I have faith that I'm going to do it. It takes practice. It's the same thing with OFM. It takes, you got to get in it. You got to start on day one. Like you started day one of running. It wasn't easy, but you wanted to be a runner. So you kept going and you got through that first week, the second week, the third week. It was tough, but now you're a runner and you're loving life and you feel good and all these things. It's the same thing that you're asking athletes to do in accepting, you know, that first week is, I'm going to tell everybody I'm about to do this. All right, next week we're getting into it. This is hard. Day one's hard. Day two is hard, but I'm going to get through this. And then I'm going to move forward. And it's not that I have faith in it. It's because everything I do, I've shown up for it and I'm doing it purposefully and I'm doing the work. So when I look at what we have faith in, I actually think it's your self-identity. Like I have faith in myself that I can do these things, actually, not in faith that these carbs are going to get me through a race.
And that's exactly where I was going with this, because it really revolves around having faith in you and not placing that faith and belief system in somebody else. I mean, your own agency, right?
Exactly.
And you know, like you say, with the reset, we got the week of prep, the 2 to 3 weeks of going through the transition. But then, you know, when you get out of detox, that's detox. It's like going to rehab, right? You're not climbing the walls, you're not getting hangry every 2 or 3 hours, but you're not feeling all that strong as an athlete. And that's where, you know, the next 3 months we do the adaptation to really upregulate. Now you have this foundation. Now let's build a solid house in your body rather than a house of carbs. Instead of a house of carbs, it's a house of carbs, because you don't have a foundation. You have this foundational fueling with your fat. Now you build upon it, build the metabolic capacity so you can bring carbs in strategically. You can use them to adapt and get stronger and perform, because that's the problem with the keto diet. If you don't have that ability to perform, which is what keto restricts you at, you never get the adaptive stress to tell your cells, hey, we need to make more mitochondria. You don't tell your cardiovascular system, we need to be able to get more O2 in and CO2 out, you know, and you know, and we need to challenge, and that's part of it. Like I'm talking on that cellular biology level, but it's like you say, you got to challenge yourself to do hard things. And then all of a sudden that hard thing gets easier. And then you see the benefit of it. And it's like, oh, it's like I was telling a friend the other day, it's like, who does this stuff. And it's like, God, I gotta go out and get my ass whooped on a regular basis to really see this work. Not just go for an easy run or a nice long run in the mountains. I need an ass whooping. Yeah.
And then then you can have reminders that you got your ass whooped and you can do that. But like, you know, like, right. I think that's it. Like everybody's just got to have, if you're going to put faith in anything, put faith in yourself that you've been there and you did it and you were successful. And until you can put yourself through it and make those changes, then you don't have true, like your own data, so to speak, that you can be successful. And that's what you're really looking for. We want people to be the architects of their own self-identity and what they can do and their own behavior change.
Yeah. And that's exactly why I say we're guides, not gurus. We've got a proven set of protocols to get people there, but you're going to climb that mountain on your own.
Right.
We're here to help you with the information, the products, support, the coaching, the psychological coaching, all those things to get you there. But you know, you can do it. And you know, you may not be a Jeff Browning, but most of the people I work with are regular people. And, you know, when I do a podcast with them, nobody gets traction because who are these people? Right. But it's like, no, those are these are everyday people who are doing incredible things in spite of the fact that they've got full lives.
Right. Your weekend warriors that are going off and they're like, oh my goodness, you know, people have told me, they're like, what, you're racing do you have another race this weekend? And then you show up for work on Monday, you know, and I used to work my corporate position. And I'm like, yeah, I just look at it differently. My perspective is different than your perspective of what I can do versus your perspective of what you can do. And when you start to open up your boundaries and you start to live life without as much fear, then you start to go, oh, I can do that too. And if you're looking at other people, and we said this is dangerous in measuring yourself up to other people, the good thing about social media is that you can see people like you having these adventures, and maybe that can start to challenge your self-image or what you think you can do, and then you take those next steps, and look at it positively.
Yeah, no, and that makes me think of the blog that came out last week with Jenny Capel and her career in ultra running. Mm-hmm. I mean, she really found the balance, and being a top elite level female, you know, starting out in her career as an ultra runner, then taking a pause to have kids and raising a family. Then even as she raised a family, she's back being competitive, right? And then, you know, doing everything she wanted to do in her career as an ultra runner, as a physical therapist, but finding that balance. And like you said, you know, and making it work. And she's transitioning now where she's done competitively running, but she still wants to run, but she wants to spend time with her husband playing golf. And, you know, she's going to be empty nesting. So she's like excited about that transition, like you say.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's another opportunity. I think that that's it. We should look at things in a positive way as next step opportunities, not as, oh, I'm going to retire from competitive racing. This is the end of something. No, this is an opportunity for different types of experiences.
Right. And that experience of competitive racing will propel me into the next chapter.
Absolutely. And that's it. Like, I think that's a way that I think people need to have a change and look at, like, perspective on their own lives and whatever you're doing. Like, how could I reframe this and move away from negativity and towards positivity and be optimistic?
From fear to curiosity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Super. Well, thanks again, Amy, for joining me with this. I'm really looking forward to our collaboration. I think we're going to have I want to continually innovate and develop this. And, you know, it just seems like all the right elements just keep coming in. And, you know, it's been a wonderful journey. It's been full of challenges, let me tell you, because we're doing innovation, and it's been rocky as a business, really rocky as a business. But I think we're finally starting to get that, you know, the hating has died down quite a bit, and more people are curious.
Yeah.
And, you know, you're one of those people, right?
Right. You gotta go through that. I mean, look, that not every religion started with the greatest acceptances either. So
right. It's like Schopenhauer's thing, like everything goes through three phases, right? It's
right. Like you got to open the door. This was a lot of fun for me. I appreciate you having me on too, and I look forward to collaborating and working together, and, you know, and bringing more information, you know, to everybody, and athletes and just people like that are trying to get healthy as well.
Well, and it's like my marketing director says. He says a rising tide floats all boats.
Yep.
So let's float some boats without having hurricanes and monsoons.
Yeah, for sure. No, I don't say
that. Been through that.
Yeah, no H word here in Florida right now, or them now being engaged in superstitious behaviors to send the
you're
hurricane.
Going to the fall winter, which is why everybody moves from New York down.
That's correct. That's right. Correct. But yeah, again, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun. This was great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.